All right, folks, NDSU is coming up in less than a week right now, and we're going to try to do this a little bit different. We're going to break down the offense for NDSU, and then I'm going to ask you, what would you do on defense on this episode of Alpine Garage Sports? All right, so let's get into this. I want to make some short videos this week instead of having some really long ones. So we're gonna break down a little bit of the offense for NDSU this year, and I'll give you a little bit of statistical information, and then I'm gonna ask you some questions at the end. And if you would make your notes down in the comments, we can go back and forth on this and kind of do this as a group. And then we're gonna do defense either tomorrow or in a couple of days. The NDSU defense and what we should do on offense. And then I'm going to break down my keys of the game a couple of days before the NDSU game. And that's going to be based off of the information that we go back and forth on. I think you've seen my videos from last year and early this year, and you know what I value when it comes to Colorado this year. And it is, well, we're not even going to talk about it right now, because if you've watched the channel, you know what I'm talking about. We will go through that at the end here. So first, let's go through, obviously, I think all of us know, and if you don't, then we'll state it now. NDSU is a running team. It's been a running team for a long time. Their new head coach that's come to them from the University of Wyoming also came from a running team as well. So when we're talking about running, let's break that down a little bit. So NDSU last year ran 618 times versus 319 pass attempts, which is a 66% running percentage. Wyoming ran 468 times versus 304 passes. So even though they have a new head coach, the values are going to be the same on offense, I do believe. So, and Wyoming was a 60.1% run percentage. So obviously both the NDSU core team and their history as being, a world beater when it comes to football, especially in the FCS ranks. Also, Wyoming, which is where their new head coach came from, also a running team. So when you're talking about, is the value going to change? I don't know that it's going to change all that much, but let's talk about it down in the comments. Now here is one of the biggest issues playing North Dakota State University, is that they have a two-headed monster in quarterback. And you may know these names, but you have Cam Miller and Cole Payton. Now, Cam seems to be going to be the starter this year, and Cole is kind of his backup, comes in on short yardage plays. Really big quarterback. I mean, I think he's Cole's like 6'3", 235 or something like that. Kind of runs like a fullback, and they say that he's going to be a tight end possibly in the NFL, or he could be a tight end in the NFL. But anyway, those two quarterbacks ran for over 600 yards last year each. So Cam Miller ran for 629 yards and Cole Payton ran for 615 yards. So obviously they love to run the quarterbacks in this offense. And I don't think that's going to change this year. I think they're going to probably try to manipulate that a little bit, because they're both pretty accurate. I mean, Cam Miller was over 70% last year, and Cole Payton was like at 68 or something like that. I don't even remember the statistic now, but they're both are very accurate passers. They just don't pass the ball very often. Also, Cam Miller had the team's highest rushing attempts. Now, obviously, some of that was due to pressure, and you're going to chalk that up as a run. But obviously, I think we have established that their quarterbacks are going to be a problem when it comes to the running aspect of the game. Now, let's look at the NDSU running backs. So they have 9 running backs on their roster. So obviously they're very run heavy, right? And 7 of them are over 200 pounds. Now that's just a random statistic, but what I mean by that is they're a big bruising running team. They like to really just force the run. And with the majority of their running backs being big-bodied running backs, I think they're going to continue to try to do to us what they've done to every other team over the past decade. Their number 1 running back this year is probably going to be Barika Pino, 5'10", 209, 501 rushing yards last year. And the number 2 running back this year is potentially going to be TK Marshall, 6 foot, 208 pounds, and had 386 yards last year. Now, keep in mind that at 386 yards last year, I think that was like the number 5 rusher. So you had their number 1 rusher last year is not going to be here this year. And then you have the 2 quarterbacks as number 2 and number 3. And then you had Barica as number 4, and you had TK as number 5. The reason why I went through all of that, which you may have already known, is the fact that North Dakota State may come up with an alternative game plan for Colorado and may not try to run the ball as much, may try to pass the ball more, to try to change their game plan so we can't game plan against them. That's a possibility. I personally don't feel like that's going to be the case. I mean, if you're good at something and you win national titles doing it, there's no reason to not stay with that, right? They might pass it a little more often, especially if their running game is working moderately well and they can pull us in a little bit. They might try to pass on us a little bit more than they normally do. But I still don't think that that's going to, that Tiger's not going to change its stripes, as they say, because they're so good at what they do. And they have the personnel to do it. Not to mention that, if you are NDSU right now, and one of the only things you have to go on is last year's Colorado team, we are 107th versus the run last year, which obviously our defense is not the same defense. But when you're looking at that statistic from last year, they're thinking our strongest part of our game is our running game, including on quarterbacks rushing. And their weakest part is going to be their run defense. So why not try to expose that early in the game? So I am of the belief that they're going to stick to their game plan and try to force us to stop the run. Now, here are the questions that I want you to answer down in the comments. First, if you were NDSU, would you stick to your game plan and run the ball and use your quarterbacks the same way you have in the past? Or would you try to make a more mixed, a more balanced offense for Colorado to try to stretch the defense a little bit? Which one would you do if you were NDSU? Second, what defense would you run if you were Colorado? Would you run the traditional 4-2 defense? Or would you run a 4-3 defense? Or would you run a 4-4 defense? How heavy would you go in the box against the NDSU team starting out the game? Obviously, you can make in-game adjustments as we go along. But what would be your strategy going into the game? And then last, and something that I've been thinking about ever since I started looking at NDSU is, do you run a key on the quarterback, or do you run a spy? Does Colorado run a spy on defense to keep the quarterbacks at bay? And for those of you who are familiar with running a spy, it can work in the fact that you basically, the quarterback is accounted for at that point. But the negative is that now your defense is at a disadvantage because all of your players are basically on people and you don't have anybody else to back up the defense. So what would you do? Would you run a key or a spy, or would you not? So those are the 3 questions that answer in the comments. Let's get a group consensus down in there, and then at the end of this next week before the game, actually probably on Tuesday or Wednesday, I will take all that data, put that in, and we'll come up with what we think our game plan would be going into NDSU. Thank you for hanging out with me today. I hope you found this informative and exciting. Put your comments down to answer these questions. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and we'll see you in the next video.